So I want to move on a little bit more towards the environment in the administration's agenda. And on the subject of the environment, some facts that I was able to gather here. So there was an EPA study that named transportation as the single most, one of the largest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions. But when they speak about maritime, maritime itself actually represents a small percentage of those emissions compared with trucks and cars that are on the road. If we look back at the start of 2020, in January, the IMO 2020 went into effect, and that put a limit on the amount of sulfur that is used in marine bunker fuels, and with the goal of reducing shipping emissions by 50% by 2050. Biden's own plan from an executive order that was signed too was to trust science, protect our environment, and reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and achieve net zero global emissions by 2050 or before. With yesterday, Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg, there was chatter about the bill that we'll find out more about tomorrow too. And he also mentioned at some point that transportation is going to be a huge component of this. But since we're talking about shipping, we're talking about a greener, more renewable future. Obviously, that's going to involve investments, right? And yes, we can think that investments, some funding will come from the federal government. How it will be allocated, as Lorianne mentioned, it'll come down to the states, but we'll have to see how that plays. And so, Lorianne, question for you from your Dynasties of the Sea book. It discussed about how men and women, a very select few in a post-World War, helped build a very thriving maritime industry. And they embraced technology, they embraced looking forward, helped create jobs. So, I feel like we're at that turning point again. The environment is back on the table. We want to have something that children will benefit from too. So, with new ship designs, with new engine technology, alternative fuels, it's going to require heavier investments. So do you think that we're in a good spot where we might see history repeat itself from that post-World War era? Or do you think that the costs are just too high and, maybe these ambitions are a little bit too far out of reach?
It's great that you bring it up. I actually spoke with Peter Sand, who's the chief shipping analyst for BIMCO, about this, because the fleet contracting activity that we're seeing in terms of investment, it's down. And I was asking him, because we were talking about this at CNBC, because of the plethora of alternative energy. There's so much opportunity out there. Because there's so much opportunity out there, owners, based on this energy efficiency index, right now it currently only has new builds in there, but now they're going to see if existing ships are going to be folded in. And that's why now you have seen a pullback in terms of the investment of newer ships. Because if you can keep your ship, you're not going to reinvest. You're not going to reinvest into a new vessel. So because of this high degree of uncertainty and the regulation in all of this, you do have a hesitation in terms of where folks are going to put their money. Because remember, a ship takes years to make. So when you look at the cyclicality of shipping, where we've had the overbuilding in the years and then the pullback, it's a great from what Dagfinn Lund from my first Dynasties of the Sea book told me. The same mistakes are made in a cycle, but by different people, because the newer person in that generation thinks that they were smarter than the last that made that mistake. So I think as of right now, because of all this uncertainty coupled with all of these great different technologies, we're seeing a pullback because we're trying to figure out what we can get away with before we start sinking in the money.